Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to Unsheathed Sword Reviews. I'm John.
I'm Vic.
And today we are going to talk about this magnificent sword right in front of us, which is an Angus Trim Type 18B.16. And it is worth noting that this is not our said Type 18.16B sword from Angus Trim. This belongs to Kane Shen, who, in addition to being kind enough to partner with us on multiple videos, was nice enough to lend us this sword so that we could review it before he ever even got to touch it. I got to tell you, I think I'm a pretty nice person, and I'm not that nice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, Kane, we want to give you definitely a direct shout out. Thank you very much for letting us handle this sword. It made a lot of sense to do it with the other review that we did together, and also just to get some excellent content with a wonderful sword. And we're going to send it back. It's in the mail, we promise.
Yeah. I'm not running away with it at all. If you find yourself blocked and Unsheathed Sword Reviews deleted, I don't know what that's about. But yeah, in all reality, thank you so much, Kane. This sword is amazing. Thank you for letting us pick it up and play with it and do a review and film some videos about it before you even got it. That's ridiculous. That's so nice.
I couldn't believe you did that. So just for folks that are a little bit less familiar with Oakshot typology, just talk a little bit about what the 18B.16 means.
Okay, so the Oakshot typology is a classification system for double-edged medieval swords. So 18 has subtypes, and this is an 18B. And 18Bs have a long, slender blade. They usually have a flattened diamond or a hollow ground cross-section. Oftentimes, they have a reinforced tip. They usually have long grips, 10, 11 inches. Oftentimes, they are waisted grips, and they are very much made at the height of plate armor. They're used in like the 15th century, so they need to be very, very good cut and thrust swords. And the edge geometry, the profile of the blade, and the way that it tapers makes for a sword that is very, very good in the cut, very good in the thrust, and at a point in time when armor was kind of at its apex, the 18 typology was sort of the apex of a cut and thrust sword and how to combat that. So it is a 18B.16. The number there at the end is the number of revisions that Angus Trim has made. So basically he has 16 different models of an 18B, and they vary in size, shape, bunch of differences like that. So this is the 16th version of that, and this is actually a relatively new sword. As far as I know, Kane was maybe the first or second person to actually purchase one from Mr. Trim, and we are very, very fortunate, and as far as I know, the first people to be able to review this type of sword. So that's really exciting for us because, spoiler alert, it's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. We were really, really happy to get it in our hands. And just to kind of go from there, we can talk a little bit about the fit and finish. And I think that what you get is pretty much what you can expect from any Angus Trim sword. You get very, very good, solid, tight fit and finish without any bells and whistles, essentially. Mm-hmm. One thing I do really like about the way this looks, which is a matter of taste and slightly a matter of functionality as well, is that both the pommel and the guard are blued, mm-hmm. which I think looks absolutely great, especially juxtaposed against that sort of reddish, maroonish, crimsonish kind of handle. I think it looks fantastic. But again, that's a matter of taste. But what it will do is definitely stop it, or at least retard the rusting from happening on the crossguard and blade. So fit and finish wise, I mean the blade is even in the gap pretty much. I mean it's a well put together sword, which is what you would expect. It's just not, as Vic might say, bougie. It's mm-hmm. just sort of utilitarian in its construction, which is kind of what I like anyway. So what do you think, Vic?
So yeah, pretty much we'll agree with everything you said there. So if you've had the pleasure of handling or seeing Angus Trim swords in person, John hit the nail on the head. They're not overly decorative. They're not overly ornate. And we'll talk about it in the handling. With an Angus Trim sword, what you're paying for is the handling of the sword.
Absolutely.
That said, though, the fit and finish of this sword is very much good for high-end.
Agreed.
The leather cord wrap feels really, really good in your hand. The shape of the grip allows for indexing phenomenally well. We'll talk about that in the handling. It has a seam that you can see with the eye, but you can't really feel it at all. And the guard and pommel, like John said, the bluing with this particular red color just looks outstanding. Mm-hmm. The blade itself, the central ridge, wavers a little bit in spots. There's a little bit of asymmetry toward the tip of the blade, but nothing that at all affects the functionality, but nothing that aesthetically deters from the sword in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. It is an absolutely gorgeous sword, and one that, if you've seen Angus Trim swords, is very recognizable as an Atrim. Like, if you've seen his swords at all, you would see this and know exactly who made it.
I was going to say exactly that. You can look across from the, I mean, even without the nutted pommel that he does, his special nutted pommel, you can just spot it from across the room, and that's an Atrim. You know exactly what it is. And, you know, all the things Vic said are true, and all of the design choices are to enhance functionality.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing flashy. There's nothing that doesn't need to be there. It's just purely designed to be the best possible cut and thrust sword of this size and weight and everything that it can possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, yeah, we can talk about handling in a minute, but yeah, he does a good job.
Yeah, fit and finish is perfectly fine
definitely.
for a high-end sword. I am happy with it. I have no complaints.
Absolutely. Agreed.
So let's talk about the handling real quick, because as I said, that's kind of what you're paying for with an Atrim sword.
Yep.
And it should be noted that this type of 18B, so most 18Bs that you'll see kind of on the market are very long, slender blades. This is actually a really, really wide example of an 18B. This is kind of flirting with what would be classified as an 18C.
Yeah.
18Cs, as you might know, the Albion Principe, Alexandria, those types of swords are very, very broad blades at the base. This is getting close to that.
And if you want an example of one of those, you can look back at our review that we just did a couple of weeks ago about the Type 18C put out by
Beller Arms
and LK Chen. Yeah. So and in fact, even though they're different typologies, we talked a little bit about comparisons between those two swords, and they're kind of more alike than not.
Yes, very much so. Especially once you start to flirt with how wide of an 18B this is. So it should also be mentioned that the Oakshot typology, they're not hard rules. They're kind of like loose guidelines.
Right.
And there are many, many swords historically that don't fall neatly into one category or the other, that are kind of like a blend of one or the other. And while this very much matches the description of an 18B, it's really starting to push the line of an 18C. And to me, that's freaking awesome, because that's a sword type that's not really overly represented on the market. And so this is a very, very broad, relatively short for an 18B blade, and that means this is a monster of a cutter.
Absolutely.
Like, holy crap, John, what did you think of the handling?
So the thing about this sword that it kind of tricked me, and it tricked Scott, our friend Scott, and it even tricked Vic a little bit, I think, is that because it's so well balanced, you don't notice how much mass it has, particularly how much mass it has out towards the end of the blade. And so I was ending up cutting low because it just feels so light and lively in your hand that you don't even compensate for the weight in a way that you would with a less balanced feeling sword. So that was an interesting phenomenon to experience. I don't even know if I'm explaining it well enough, but it was definitely a thing. It was like it felt so light and so fast, and then it ended up being heavier in the tip than I expected it to be.
Right, because so 18s, they do retain a lot of the mass up toward the tip, just by their design. And this sword, while for its size is not terribly heavy, you know, it weighs in at 2 pounds 15 ounces.
Right.
That's still a pretty hefty sword, especially, you know, with the point of balance at about 4.5 inches. Blade has immaculate distal taper. But you're right in that, like, I even noticed when I would get it swinging, I would put more kind of oomph into the swing than I needed to.
Yes, absolutely.
And then, like, after the first, like, 2 or 3 times, I was just like, I don't need to put that much effort into it. And then all of a sudden, I started pulling off one-handed cuts that were like, this sword makes you better than you have any right to be if you have no training like we do. I have 0 training in HEMA, and this sword made me feel overconfident in my ability, and I think that's a testament to how good of a handling sword this is.
And I think that, you know, certain other swords that, you know, we've talked about handle a lot of the same way, like the Albion Principe, those sort of things. They make you better than you are. And this is definitely the same sort of effect, I think.
100%. I feel like if you were a HEMA practitioner and you went into a cutting competition with this, I feel like your advantage would be close to what a Principe would be, or an Alexandria. In fact, I'm really curious to see Kane Shen review of this sword eventually, because he has a Principe, so he can make that direct comparison and let us know how close it is. But my sense is this would have close to the cutting authority and power of a Principe, but it would be faster and more agile and quicker on the recovery, as it's a lot lighter.
I tend to agree with that, yeah. I think you're probably right with that. So yeah, I mean, handling wise, it's definitely that's where the value's at in this sword is its handling. It's unbelievable. And
again, so this we mentioned real quick, this is a $1,400 sword. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for even if you collect high-end swords, that's a lot of money to shell out on a sword.
Agreed.
What you're getting from Angus Trim is, you know, that he's making every one of these swords himself. He's making changes on it until it feels right, and that's why dynamically his swords have a very unique and distinct feeling to them. If you've ever held an Angus Trim sword, you recognize that it's an Angus Trim sword. And that's why they're preferred in cutting competitions oftentimes.
Completely agree. And again, there's a reason he's done 16 revisions of this particular sword, because he really likes to get the most out of them. And so you can tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's just, again, unparalleled handling experience.
Right. And if you haven't had the opportunity to handle an Angus Trim sword, if you can make it out to like Combat Con or anything like that where he'll have a booth. I don't believe he's personally traveling anymore, but I think he's having a representative go and have some of his swords at those. I implore you to go handle some of the swords at the very least, even if you're not going to buy, because it's mind-blowing what they feel like.
I completely agree with that. Get one in your hands in any way possible that you can. That doesn't involve breaking the law.
Okay, so the fit and finish is good. The handling's immaculate. The price is very high. John, what do you think?
I mean, here's the thing, right? We had the same discussion when we talked about the Ansbach sword. $1,400 is a lot of money for anybody. Okay, $1,400 for a non-essential item is a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
You can go on vacation for $1,400.
Yeah, like for real. I can feel myself like shriveling up inside as I say this, but I think it's worth it. I really think that like if you wanted a sword that is pretty much like, like Wolverine, the best it is at what it does, right? Except what it does isn't very nice. But no, like seriously, if you want like the best type 18B towards the heavier end, towards the wider end, this is the sword you should get. And I think it's worth every penny. I think every penny that you spend on this sword gets you something that's worth it. Now, if you don't have that money to spend, then you don't have that money to spend. But I would say if you do, this is 100% worth it.
I want one. Damn you, Kane. I didn't need another high-end sword to add to my wish list. I agree with everything John just said. Some people can't afford $1,400, and that's perfectly fine.
And you'll never be able to, and that's okay.
And we're going to have swords for you to check out on this channel. Hopefully that will pique your interest. If you can swing it, or if you can save up for it, or yes, it is completely worth it. The experience of swinging this sword around and handling it is almost awe-inspiring. It is an amazing sword. It would be the centerpiece of any collection, and I just think it's one of the best swords I've ever handled, and I've handled some good swords.
Agreed.
So, yes, it's worth every single penny.
It handles amazingly. It's visually striking. It's a great representation. I mean, it's a really neat sword. I don't think you could do better for any amount of money, really.
No. Kane, thank you so much for letting us handle this, and also I kind of hate you a little bit because you made me want one so much.
Absolutely, for sure. So, we'll do one less vacation this year, maybe.
That is a double-edged sword. See what I did there? Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to leave you on that before this gets worse. We appreciate your watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, we would definitely appreciate that.
Do all the things.
Peace.